Good evening and welcome. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I serve as the Director of Alumni Engagement for the Mizzou Alumni Association. And as a proud Mizzou alumna, in my role, I have the honor of being able to connect with incredible alumni across the country, but specifically here in the DC, Washington, DC area. And so grateful for you all being here tonight and for me to be able to be here with you. The Mizzou Alumni Association is a proud partner with the Kinder Institute on Constitutional Democracy to present the series of civil dialogue events across the country. There isn't a better time for programs like this, and we are especially fortunate to have the nation's leading institute on constitutional democracy right here at Mizzou. So let's give it a round of applause for Kinder Institute. Mizzou. Yes, thank you. Mizzou has a strong presence in our nation's capital, and we're looking for Mizzou ambassadors to support alumni activities and volunteer opportunities across the DC metro area. So I want to give a huge shout out to Susie, who was going to help us tonight, and to Carter and Lisa, and Lara, who helped greet people tonight. And so if that sounds fun to you and you're looking for other ways to get involved, please see me after. We would love to have more volunteers be able to serve in roles like this, or write congrats notes to admitted students, or we've got our newest initiative that we are piloting called Spot a Tiger, where you know that thrill when you see somebody wearing Mizzou stuff and you're not in Columbia or Missouri at all. So we want to be able to capitalize on that and be able to celebrate when you spot another tiger in the wild, being able to make that connection. So if any of that sparks interest, come talk to me afterwards, and we'd love to tell you more. I would also glad to talk to you about membership up to the Mizzou Alumni Association. Support from our members makes events like this possible, so thank you to all of our members who are here tonight, and all the support you provide. Now, to kick off tonight's program, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mizzou alumna Jean Becker. Jean is a New York Times bestselling author and co-founder of Civil Dialogues. She is also a volunteer who serves as a member of the Kinder Institute's advisory board. So on behalf of our team at the Mizzou Alumni Association, welcome once again, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jean Becker. Thank you.
Okay, to all of you people who are not Mizzou alumni, we love you too. I'm thrilled. I have so many friends here. It's just thank you for coming. You know who you are, and it just means everything that you're here. And don't worry, we're not going to ask you for money. Stephanie, we cannot ask the non-Mizzou people for money. Anyway, if someone had told me while I was growing up on a farm in Missouri that one day I would get to speak at the Library of Congress, I might have accused them of drinking too much moonshine. Yes, my neighbor made moonshine. It is just a great honor to be here. We have much to talk about, but before we get to today's program, let me explain what Civil Dialogues is. While serving as President Bush's Chief of Staff, and by the way, when I talk about President Bush, I mean the first President Bush, President Bush 41. If I'm going to talk about the second President Bush, I'll probably say W or 43, but I'm talking about the first President Bush. While serving as his Chief of Staff, I became acquainted with Linda Laurel, who was anchor of Houston's NBC affiliate for 17 years, and she was one of President Bush's favorite local journalists. If he had something on his mind that he wanted to say, he would say to me, "Get Linda on the phone and tell her to get over here." And she even jumped out of an airplane, which was above and beyond the call of duty for you to do that. Anyway, Linda and I became friends along the way. A few years ago, she and I were sitting in a bar. Okay, that's not true, I just lied. We were having lunch. But it'd be such a better story if we were in a bar. So let's pretend we're in a bar, and we were having a conversation. We were concerned about our democracy. We were just couldn't stop talking about. We were concerned about what we saw on the news and what was going on in our country. And we decided it was time to stop yelling at our TV sets and do something, do anything. So we began a conversation with the head of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation at Texas A&M. It helps that I'm on the board of directors. They had no choice but to talk to us. And then we talked to the LBJ Foundation in Austin, the LBJ Library, the Clinton Library in Little Rock, Arkansas. We talked to the Baker Institute at Rice University, and these First thing you know, Civil Dialogues was born with the great support of some of these presidential library systems and of the Baker Institute. And then perhaps the best thing that happened to us was when the Kinder Institute expressed interest in partnering with us, and we'll forever be grateful for that. It's because of Kinder that we're here tonight. And I'm so honored to be on your board. We have talked about immigration and all these events we've done. We have tackled immigration, climate change, the importance of bipartisanship, the Middle East, and various other topics. If nothing else, you cannot call us cowards. The idea of civil dialogues is to give you a chance to listen to experts who can talk about various sides of an issue. After all, every issue has a side. And give you a chance to ask your questions, voice your concerns, and make your opinion known. No shouting, no name calling, no vitriol, just dialogue, civil dialogue. And you'll have a chance tonight to practice being civil. I don't think there's anyone among us who isn't struggling with having civil dialogue. No one. A few months ago, I was asked to go on CNN to talk about the demolition of the East Wing. That was where my tiny office was located for the 4 years I was one of Barbara Bush's deputy press secretaries. My good friend Jamie Gangel at CNN called me and asked me to come on the air to talk about the East Wing being torn down, and I told her I would be happy to do so. But she and her producer needed to know that every other word would be the F word. There was this long pause. She said, "Do you know any other former East Wingers who would be willing to come on CNN?" Needless to say, I did not go on CNN. And for those of you who know her, Anita McBride did. I recruited Anita McBride to go on. And by the way, yesterday my flight to come here was delayed by 7 hours. Thank you for that sympathy. Yeah, I could have used some civil dialogue. We all need to figure out how to talk to each other, more importantly, how to listen to each other, and how to disagree without shouting, belittling, and worse, pulling out a gun. Enough. We can do better. We have to do better. Our democracy depends on it. As we approach our 250th anniversary, Jay Sexton, who is on our panel tonight, he's the head of the Kinder Institute. You will meet him shortly. He had the brilliant idea of devoting this civil dialogue session to looking back at our history and how it might help us better understand what is going on today. But before I turn it over to Linda and our panelists, I, of course, have a few thoughts to share. First, if you feel these are the worst of times, I beg to disagree. Trust me, I have a lot of angst about what I see happening, particularly in this town and particularly across the street from this building. They closed the curtain, so I can't point to the Capitol. When this event's over, we're going to march over there. We're going to storm the barricades. Some of you might die, but it's for our country. Anyway, what goes on over there and on the news, the name calling, the total disrespect for anyone who does not agree with you, the refusal on both sides to reach across the aisle, as you can imagine, I could go on and on. As a former journalist, the attacks on the media make me feel ill, and the tendency to try to solve our problems through violence on both sides of the debate is even worse. I can tell you one short story that shows how much we have changed. In 1969, Congressman George H.W. Bush decided to run for the U.S. Senate in Texas. He wasn't sure it was a good move, but his father had been a senator, he really wanted to be a senator. So who did he ask for advice in Texas if this was a good idea? LBJ. He went to see LBJ on his ranch and asked the former president if he thought he should run for the Senate. President Bush loved telling this story because LBJ said to him, and I quote, George, the difference between the House and the Senate is the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad. Run for the Senate. Can you imagine, and by the way, President Bush did lose that race, but it turned out okay for him, so don't worry about him. Can you imagine such a conversation taking place today between two people? Can you imagine a Democrat or Republican congressman or senator going to a Republican, or can you imagine Ted Cruz going to Barack Obama for advice? I mean, how did we let this happen? So maybe it is the worst of times. Nah, it's not. Just watch Ken Burns' documentary on the American Revolution. How many of you have seen it? I've been working at it these last few weeks. Except for George Washington and his men at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777, when a number of them, a lot of them froze to death, our idea of the American Revolution is pretty romantic. We think of Paul Revere, we think of George Washington crossing the Delaware River, we think of Pied Pipers, and we think of Betsy Ross making the flag and our victory at Yorktown. The truth is, it was really ugly. An estimated 20% of the colonists stayed loyal to England. And just like the Civil War, there were brothers fighting brothers. When the British captured Philadelphia in 1777, the streets were packed with loyalists cheering them on and welcoming them to Philadelphia. Many colonists lost everything during the war, their homes, their livelihood, and family members. And there was great confusion and anger among the Native Americans and enslaved and free Black people. They weren't sure whose side to be on. They had been treated horribly by both the British and the colonists. So yes, our beginning was a little rough. Now I'm getting into Jay's territory. Our historian will talk a little more about this. But I do want to tell you one more story. To fast forward 225 years from the American Revolution, we have another big anniversary coming up this fall. It will be the 25th anniversary of 9/11. And a couple weeks after 9/11, a young mother was pouring her heart out to President H.W. Bush. Susan Biddle, you know who it is. Nancy. Pouring her heart out to President Bush. She had 2 young kids. And she said to him, "You have no idea how hard it is to raise children in this climate. My children are scared to death. They think the world is falling apart. You have no idea, Mr. President. These are the worst of times. You have no idea how hard this is." I watched him take a deep breath. I think he counted to 10. And then he said to her with compassion, "In my lifetime, this country survived the Great Depression. The bread lines were miles long. The entire world went to war in the 1940s. Hundreds of millions of people died, 6 million Jews alone in the Holocaust." He reminded her that he himself had been shot down during World War II. He talked a lot about the 50s, the nuclear fear in the 50s and 60s. How many of you remember the nuclear war drills in grade school? We hid under our desk. You know, they thought that would save us. And he talked at length about the 60s. 3 major assassinations, rioting in the streets over civil rights in Vietnam. The 60s, when I grew up, they were complicated. And President Bush's point to her was, "We will be okay. We have survived all of this, and we will be okay." And I know if he was here today, he would say the same thing to us. Yes, they are challenging times. We need to pay attention. We need to remind ourselves that what unites us is still more powerful than what divides us. We need to make sure we're doing our part to get to the other side of this. Above all, we need to vote. You already took a huge step. You came here tonight. You could be home binge watching something on Netflix, or thank God the NBA finals are over, although none of you would be here, but you could be watching the World Cup right now. But you decided to come here to hear about civil dialogues. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Before I turn this over to my partner, Linda Laurel, and Jay Sexton's going to die that I'm telling this story. He's heard me tell it 15 times today. I'm not a soccer fan, but oh my God, do I love all the great stories going on right now in our country about the teams. And the best one, this is sort of embarrassing, Jay Sexton, the head of the Kinder Institute at the University of Missouri. He's a Kansas Jayhawk. He went to Kansas. And unless you're from the Midwest, you really don't know how awful that really is. But we love him anyway. But one of the biggest stories coming out is the team from Algeria is staying in Lawrence, Kansas. And they're making big news because the people, they're wearing their colors, the flag is flying everywhere. They met them in the middle of the night. It is a love fest. And what a great example. I think all of World Cup can help remind us that what unites us is more important than what divides us. And right now it's the World Cup. It's in Houston and we're pretty excited about it. Anyway, I'm going to turn this over to my partner. Linda Laurel was an Emmy Award-winning journalist who, as I said before, was the NBC anchor for 17 years. She's also a Mizzou grad, journalism school like me. We love all you people not from Mizzou. Trust me, we do love you. Today, she is CEO and executive producer of Linda Laurel Media, a video production and communications consulting firm. Linda, it is all yours. But as soon as they're done, we march to the Capitol. Okay.
Oh my God, Jean, you'll have to lead us, Jean. You will definitely have to lead us.
As long as your husband's with me.
Yeah, okay. Okay, all right. So I echo Jean's sentiments and want to say thank you all so very much for taking the time to be here with us tonight and participate. And you're going to be a big part of this because after our panel discussion, Jean and I are going to come into the audience. We're going to take your questions. We want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, and this is a dialogue among all of us. So you know what, Jean? You and Jay and I had some very interesting conversations in coming up with the title of tonight's town hall. The title, America 250, well, that was kind of a no-brainer, but the subtitle required a little bit more thought. We decided upon defending freedom and democracy in 2026 because it's specific enough yet broad enough to allow for a robust dialogue about exactly what that means to each one of us. So let's talk about democracy first. How are we feeling about this little democracy of ours? Do we even want democracy to remain our form of government? The Associated Press and the NORC Center for Public Affairs Research at the University of Chicago released a study about this just a few days ago on June 8th. It found that about 2/3 of US adults say a democratically elected government is highly important to our identity as a nation. But that's down from 80% in 2021. So now it's just 66% or so of us who believe that. One 24-year-old respondent said, it's not that the democracy part is not working. It's the people that are actually being put in office that is the problem. She went on to say, America is not what it used to be. I feel like our founding fathers would be kind of disappointed with how it is now. So let's talk about freedom for a moment. Which of our freedoms do you most value? And which ones are you most afraid of losing? The First Amendment to our Constitution guarantees 5 basic freedoms: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. According to a 2025 survey conducted by the Freedom Forum, 90% of us, 90% of Americans agree that the First Amendment is vital, and 64% say it should never be changed. But despite that, the very same survey found a majority, about 65% of Americans say they are afraid to speak freely. Why? Fear of a violent response. 42% of us are afraid of a violent response when we speak our mind. Also, fear of tension between friends and family. 37% of us are afraid of that. And here's one more tidbit to add to the equation. Young people are overwhelmingly more likely to say they're afraid to speak up. 82% of Gen Z versus 58% of my generation, baby boomers. too afraid to share their thoughts and ideas about any and everything that is happening in our country. That is why Jean and I decided to start Civil Dialogues, because we believe in democracy. And we believe that a thriving democracy, assuming that all of us still want one, depends very simply upon our ability to talk to each other. In prepping for tonight, I came across one of my favorite passages from the poet and philosopher Mark Nepo. This is from the Book of Soul, and it's a perfect setup, I think, as our dialogue begins. Yes, we can talk, but ultimately we make no ground until we listen to each other and to the current of humanity from which we rise and return. We only have one turn at being here together before we pass what we've done or not done on to the next generation. I pray we can listen to what love and suffering open us to so we can drink from that well and build a better world. So let's get to building that better world as I introduce our panelists. David Young is a former U.S. ambassador, leadership coach, United Methodist minister, and University of Missouri lecturer. He served 35 years as a foreign service officer in the Global South, concluding his diplomatic career in 2024 as ambassador to Malawi. He graduated from the University of Missouri in journalism, Boston University in theology and international relations, and Trinity College, Dublin. Please welcome David Young. Brenda Robinson is an entertainment attorney, financier, and producer with extensive experience in the film, television, and music industries. Brenda has executive produced numerous films alongside many entertainment and civic leaders, including John Legend, Alicia Keys, Katie Couric, Hillary Clinton, and Chelsea Clinton. And she is currently the board chair of the Representation Project, founded by California First partner Jennifer Siebel Newsom. Brenda also proudly serves on the board of Points of Light, a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on volunteering and service, founded by none other than former President George H.W. Bush. Please welcome Brenda Robinson. Maddie Geiler is a St. Louis native and senior at the University of Missouri studying constitutional democracy and public history. As part of an undergraduate research team, she spent the past academic year examining how Americans have commemorated, remembered, and celebrated the nation's major anniversaries across 250 years of history. Maddie spends much of her free time involving herself in various Kinder Institute organizations and events. Please welcome Maddie Geiler. And last but certainly not least, Jay Sexton is a professor of history and director of the Kinder Institute on Constitutional Democracy, a nonpartisan center for the teaching and study of the founding and history of the United States. In his classes, students explore how the fate of American constitutional democracy has always been inseparable from the global fortunes of democracy. An award-winning author of several books, his work explores how international connections and conflicts have shaped American democracy and its political history. Please welcome Jay Sexton. Time to get this show on the road. So, Jay, I'm going to start with you and ask you to help us understand and put into some historical context a few of the stats that I just shared, particularly the 1/3 of Americans who question whether democracy should even be our form of government, the 90% of us who agree that the First Amendment is vital, yet more than 2/3 of us who are afraid to speak freely. What can history teach us about how to get through this moment?
Well, democracy is messy. It's slow. Citizens don't always get what they want. Oftentimes they get nothing that they want, but they never get all that they want. You know, it's the old Churchill quote, democracy is the worst government possible except all the others. And I think maybe that's part of the answer, is that democracy has been ascendant globally, ideologically, in the last half century or so. And people are getting complacent that it comes at a cost, and the cost is you don't always get what you want. But hey, I want to make one other point here, which is I've thought a lot this year, this anniversary year, about like the weirdest bit of what makes America, of what makes any nation. And that is like, what is a nation? It's like a bunch of strangers who will never know one another, but somehow they imagine themselves as kindred people with a bond. And a bond that is so strong that individuals are prepared to make sacrifices on behalf of people that they will never know. Little sacrifices like paying taxes, but sometimes big sacrifices like going to war and risking their lives. And if you look at American history that way, if that's what the nation is, it's those bonds between strangers, and you look at the long arc of the last 250 years, it's not a story of like that idea was born in 1776 and it sort of stayed all along, or it's increased incrementally over time. It's a story of like waxing and waning, the trust between strangers. It's not something we should take for granted. It has to be cultivated. And it has to be cultivated, yes, by like government institutions and politicians. It also has to be cultivated by citizens, individuals. I think that's more important than expecting our leaders to do all the work for us. And then my last point here is if you think about American history and its long arc that way, you also realize it has to have like a soul. It has to have a spiritual core. And I think nationalism, its closest parallel would actually be like religion. It's a belief. It's something that people have faith in. And they have to believe that there's a core to that. So the most, I think, ominous sign of our time is that you have a lot of different people from across the spectrum talking about the soul of America being up for grabs, up for stake, and they mean something very different in that. So I think that the stakes couldn't really be higher than they are right now, but perhaps we should welcome that. I think that's a much more meaningful conversation than bickering about, the policy or the election of the day. What is America at heart? We've had those conversations before, and I think we might look at the most articulate exponent of what the American nation is, and that is Abraham Lincoln in our moment of greatest trial in the 19th century.
Wow. You just articulated exactly what we're hoping this panel will be. And Maddie, I would love for you to piggyback off of what Jay just said and share a little bit about the research that you've been doing about America's commemoration of its history over the last 250 years, and if there's a particular thing that he said just now that resonates with you in terms of what you saw in your research.
Yes, my research on the semi-quincentennial, a long word that I've spent a lot of time practicing saying, my team found a lot of uncertainty. All of these commemoration efforts were around times when people were searching for identity as Americans. They were around times of trials and strife and like war and battle and death. And we wanted to be able to highlight the commemoration aspect of being proud of Americans while also being uncertain and in embracing that. And one of my favorite, it's not funny, but one of my favorite little quips about it is that on our 50th anniversary as a country, the Jubilee in 1826, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died that day on July 4th. Mm-hmm. And that took us really into a new era of uncertainty with some of our last founding fathers dying. And that generation really had to grapple with the fact that they have now inherited the American experience and the experiment and the leap into faith that we took as a new nation. And I think that's true to this day, that American experiment has continued and that we never have been certain in where we're going. And the American experiment is still going. And I think that's one of the things that we very much found is the uncertainty is not new. We've always struggled with our national identity. We've always struggled with who we are and where we fit in this world. But as a young person, I have hope with where we are going.
Are you part of that 82%? Did that resonate with you when I talked about the 82% of Gen Z who are afraid to speak up? Are you seeing that among your peers?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, I think that the Kinder Institute is kind of a special place where we are more open because we do study the type of dialogue that we're doing here on a daily basis. But I've even found myself, and David Young can attest to this, that it is still hard to speak up whenever all of your classmates are kind of in like an echo chamber and you disagree, you know? We're in a time where media is so prevalent and there are so many diverse opinions and so many diverse news sources that we can look at completely different sources about the same event. They can be completely different narratives.
Yep.
So it's all where you get your news from, and that can completely change how someone looks at it. And it's hard to cross that boundary of political lines, but I think starting with conversations like this is really helping.
Yeah, and so glad you're here, Maddie, to share this with us. Brenda, the reason that you and I, as Black women, are able to sit on this stage and do the work that each of us is blessed to do is because of the hard-fought gains that were made over the course of the last 50 to 60 years, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement. And now we're witnessing the rollback of a lot of those rights, affecting not only Black Americans, but all Americans. We're also witnessing attempts to rewrite our nation's history. One of the things I didn't share with the audience that many of you might not know is that Brenda is also the niece of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. And so I know you spent a lot of time, obviously, you were very close. I know he talked to you, you witnessed him, his work, his seminal work in the Civil Rights Movement. So as you think about and reflect on that, on what you learned from him, share with us what your thoughts are about this moment.
Well, I'll start by saying how excited I am to be here to even represent a perspective. If I can offer some backstory, the original conversation about this panel was this idea that you would bring someone in who had lived through the actual moment. And when I was given that assignment from Jean and Linda, and as I started going through all the people I know and all the leaders, I realized that if I were to find someone who lived during the 60s, turns out there aren't a lot of people left who were activists, who lived through that time. And so as we were thinking about, if you look back at the history, so many of our civil rights leaders didn't make it past 39. A lot of them didn't reach 40, including Dr. King and Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and so many people. And so we started to allow the conversation to evolve, and this is how I got here, because we started to think, do I have a perspective? That was the question. And I realized I had to think about, am I well-versed enough? Do I have the life experience, the credibility even, to talk about these issues in a time period I didn't live in, but that I'm very much impacted by now? And I realized that answer was a resounding yes, because even though I didn't live through the civil rights movement, it is now living through me, because I'm now holding 40 plus years of history that has been passed down to me, and so much of my perspective on America and how great the country is are from stories and things that are not in history books. I learned about America at the dinner table, and it is now a perspective that I have my family's permission to share, things that you would never know unless you'd actually lived through it. And so as I think about the context, and we're here in this historic place, and I think about Reverend Jackson's work and how he had a very different life that he had to live. My parents, our parents, lived a very different existence. And what they endured and what they sort of battled through created a foundation for all of us to be in this room together today. I look back and think about how I've never been arrested trying to check out a library book. I have never had a water hose turned on me. Someone else took those hits so that I could sit here now comfortably on this beautiful stage and decide how I want to use my time, talent, and treasure to be an agent of change. I've decided that storytelling is my form of activism. It's telling stories, and it's helping reach people through messages that are impactful and that are meaningful. But someone had to position me to do that. And so whether it was Reverend Jackson or any of our leaders of that time, They lived a very different life so that we could live a very different life. And that is what you carry now, is this legacy. All of us are part of the legacy of America. I think about Jean's work with President Bush, 30 plus years of being in that space with someone who's so special. And she and I have talked about, like, what do you do now when those people are gone? How do you keep that work alive? Listening to them and reliving American history through them has become our lived experience now. And all of you are experiencing this in the same way, that we have a perspective to offer. And so my optimism comes from watching people live through moments and seeing how they endured and how the country became a better place because of the work that they contributed. Now we are reminded we have that responsibility as well, that we are living through a moment where we have an opportunity to also create a foundation for other people to continue to make this the greatest country it can be. And I take that very seriously, that it is my responsibility, and I feel that very deeply. I'll share, just being in DC, I think about just steps away from here, Dr. King was giving his I Have a Dream speech, and I remember my Uncle Jesse telling me, back in that time period, he had to make that decision too, to stay committed to a course of action that would change the world. That I Have a Dream speech was really the climax of many years of the Broken Promise speech. He was trying to rally people so they could understand how each of them could make a difference. It's not unlike the concept of being a point of light, that each of us has this opportunity to make a difference. So I'll share lastly that I was thinking a lot about the history as I was growing up and the many times that I've encountered people who've lived those experiences and how they've made every effort to pass that down to me. I remember one of the earliest times I was in DC was actually for Bill Clinton's second inauguration in 1997. And it was my first presidential inauguration. And what a privilege and a blessing that is. And I was walking with Reverend Jackson on the grounds of the White House. We were actually on our way to join the Clintons in their presidential box to watch the parade. And it was just he and I. It's a moment that only I have now. I'm grateful for it. As we were walking past the White House, and by the way, he decided to duck into the East Wing to make a phone call when we had landlines. I have to make a phone call before we go watch this presidential parade. But as I was taking in the institution, it was the closest I'd ever been to it, I started thinking about just the magnificence of what we do, of just what a democracy is, and what we were celebrating that day. It was a free and fair election. It's as George Bush said during the time of his campaign, a campaign is a disagreement, and disagreements divide, but an election is a decision. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, always remember that. That's democracy at work. So as we're walking forward, I'm absorbing that, and I asked my uncle, I said, you ran for president a couple times. Wasn't that long ago. How did you stay motivated to continue to do your work? You have a calling, you believe that. You never held formal office because you said you could do more work outside of having that title, just being a voice, not constricted. But you ran, and you had a message, and you had a platform, and you were trying to do something with that. And the people didn't choose you then, at least for that role. So my 18-year-old self said, well, how come you're not upset? Or why are you still inspired? Why are you here today and you're still just as enthusiastic? What kept you moving forward? And he said, because I love my country. It's the only one I have. I'm going to serve it honorably. I absorbed that, and it has carried me every day since.
Thank you for sharing those stories. It's so meaningful. We all love our country, right? We're doing everything that we can in our own way. And David, you served this country for 35 years in foreign service, and we all love the idea of American exceptionalism, and we're all proud of that. But our reputation has taken a bit of a hit in recent times. The G7's going on right now. Last month, the Denmark-based Alliance of Democracies Foundation published its annual study and found that global perceptions of the U.S. are now worse than Russia, and that the U.S. is perceived as the greatest threat to the world after Russia and Israel. Let that sink in. So my question to you, David, is in your 35 years in the Foreign Service, could you ever have imagined that this would be the case, that our country would be viewed this way on the global stage? And what do you think do we need to do in order to reverse that?
Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with all of you. As I reflect on this question, these powerful questions of where we are today and where we can go in the future, I think back over my 35 years of serving our country across the global South, in Africa and Latin America and Southeast Asia. And I'm really struck by two big themes that always come to me. On the one hand, having pride in our country, and on the other hand, having humility about who we are. And I think as we address these challenges today, we need to have pride, but we also have to have humility. Because I think when you look at where people around the world look at us today, I saw this in my 35 years as a diplomat representing our country and our values. I felt very deeply that people admired how we had struggled and advanced and fought for freedom over time, that coming from 250 years ago with noble founding documents, we had worked to live into those documents. And through the 1960s and other parts of our history, we had expanded freedom and we had moved forward in a powerful, powerful way. As a diplomat, I made that speech many, many times around the world in the 10 countries that I've lived in. And I was always struck by how in saying that we're proud of what we stand for and the ideals that we believe in, we also have to have humility about the fact that we can't, and no country can, fully live up to our ideals. I think for me, as we think about the challenges of the present moment, those concepts of tempering our pride with humility is very important. I used to hear as a diplomat and as I served as ambassador and helped lead embassies that people admired so much about us, but they wished and hoped that we wouldn't always think we are exceptional to the point of we were not like anybody else. And I think there's an important lesson that I get from my faith, because I'm also a Methodist minister. And one of the great scriptural touch points for my life is that we are called to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly. And I think sometimes when we get away from the humility, we set ourselves up for a bigger fall. I think we can build back, and we can build back our reputation, but we have to do it from a place of having that pride and humility together. And I think those profound principles have to be joined together as we build back our reputation around the world.
Such an important perspective. I love how you connected those dots for us. And I started thinking about what Jean was saying before about the World Cup and all of the people who are in our country right now from all over the world, and talking about things that we take for granted that they are enjoying. The other side of that, too, is that, you know, there have been many stories in the media over the last several days about World Cup players or people trying to enter the country who are having difficulty for the various reasons of what's going on with our immigration system. Jay, I want to talk a little bit about that and ask you to help us understand, again, from a historical perspective. I mean, I think everybody in the country knows that we have to have secure borders. We do have a secure border now. Some agree with the way that the border was secured, others do not. Some are supportive of how ICE is operating, and some are not. Immigration has been a force in this country. We are a nation of immigrants. What does history teach us? How can we get through this moment with some of the empathy that Brenda talked about and the humility that David talked about, as we think about how immigration is a big part of what is dividing us as a nation right now.
I mean, it's a great question. These panelists are great, by
Are
the
they?
way. I'm going to
You
lose
all
my
are-
job
you
here
all
with
are
all
great.
these
My
people.
gosh.
But, I mean, I've long been of the view that immigration is the single most important issue of the last 25 years, and not just in this country. It's also shaped and defined other countries' politics. I left Brexit the day after, or I left England the day after Brexit and moved over here, and that was fundamentally about immigration. I mean, hey, look, I think that the answer to the big problem has long been known by both sides of this issue, and the answer is quite obvious. A more secure border, a more limited immigration regime, but then some kind of amnesty for the people who crossed into the country without authorization. I mean, that's the obvious solution. That's the obvious solution within European countries, here in the United States as well. Our political system has not been able to deliver what has been something that the majority of the people want. They want that kind of a compromise. So I'm actually quite bullish that we will get there soon, and we will get to that obvious solution. The political system will catch up with common sense and public opinion. But when it does, this is my last point here, when it does, it doesn't mean that the issue of immigration is going to disappear from American politics. It's just going to appear in a different way. The United States will not be the same country that it was before the immigration of the last 50 years. And I say that very confidently as a historian, knowing that there was one other time we shut our borders in the 1920s. We shut the borders in the 1920s. It completely revolutionized class politics in the United States. You would never have had a New Deal in the 1930s without immigration restriction. Such a paradox, because the architects of immigration restriction did not want a powerful New Deal, but that was the result. And my wager, I will bet anyone a drink at one of those nice bars Jean was talking about, that when the immigration solution comes, within 20 years, there will be a fundamental class reorientation of American politics, and I think that that will be a good thing, because second on the list, after immigration as a combustible political issue, would be the deepening divide between the rich and the poor. And once the immigration issue is resolved, I think that that's next, and I think that will be very, very, very helpful for the country. So there's an optimistic point to end on.
Yeah, David, please.
You know, it's interesting, Jay, because I'm going to disagree with you on this one.
Oh.
I think actually that trying to bridge the profound economic divides in our country, I think that's fundamental, even it's foundational, a tectonic plate that divides us. And I think my heart aches because, you know, our national motto is E pluribus unum, out of many one. And when I was growing up in Kansas City and doing my papers for school and everything, we'd always talk about the Statue of Liberty as a symbol for who we are, welcoming people from all over the world, coming to make America stronger from all our different backgrounds. And of course, we know that's a tortured history. Many millions of people were brought here and did not choose to come here. So we have this tortured history. And yet that emblem of E pluribus unum that we came out of, many we become one, I think we need to really capture that spirit of openness to the rest of the world, because I think that's a foundational principle of who we are. And I think the economic divides are often used to divide us one from the other, and they divide us and blame the immigrant or the migrant or people who are different. And I think we really all, from all political parties and backgrounds, we need to fight for this principle that we all have human dignity. We're all created in the image of God, you know, as talking as a religious person here, but that we really need to capture that openness to the immigrant and people from other countries, because I think that is such a fundamentally American principle. And I think we can tackle the economic divides without blaming immigrants.
I'm not advocating blaming the immigrants at all.
I didn't set you up on that.
I mean, I think that, to be clear, immigration is what is like the foundation, is maybe Linda's question, of the United States. But when it reaches a certain point, and the tipping point typically has been around 14% of the population is foreign-born, it becomes a real problem, not just in this country, but in other countries. And so there's got to be a happy medium. I think it's a huge problem for the American left, because the American left sees immigrants and immigration in human rights terms, and it's difficult to have a limiting principle then from it. So I think that's something that the American left has to work on. On the right, it's like sort of blood and soil idea of nationalism. That's also something that I don't think that's a non-starter longer term. So it's difficult for both parties, but the solution is there, and I think it's compatible with the idea of a civic American nationalism.
Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was
Linda?
going to say
Please,
the
jump in.
solution for me is about coalition building also, and allyship being brought back into the conversation. You think about now, for example, all of the kind of the backlash against diversity, equity, inclusion, just the concept. If you go back to why affirmative action was even introduced as a concept, even first of all, the idea that we had to legislate fairness was a problem, but it was introduced. And the idea was not about checking boxes, creating quotas, skipping steps. It was simply about opening the door in the first place to qualified people. And the concept evolved. And to Jay's point, there's the clear application, and there's maybe the abusive one, where it's taking it too far, and suddenly we lose credibility with the argument because not everybody's applying it in the way that it was meant to be applied. And living through the 60s, 2020, you can see these patterns of like great ideas being introduced. And some people can't accept these ideas because they don't like where it came from, who proposed it, what party. We have to get rid of that and just take the concept for what it is and apply it correctly. But I look at that backlash that has been brewing for a long time. And where I see a disconnect is inclusion is actually not as inclusive as it needs to be. There is an interpretation that's only meant for this group or that group. That's where allyship gets thrown out of the conversation. People find themselves in these complicated moments in history, and they start to X themselves out of the conversation because they think this is not my fight. I'm not a member of a disenfranchised party, so I don't have to tune in. Or respectfully, I won't insert myself because I don't want to impose on your growth. All of that's not the way. If we're being responsible, we'll look at any issue that this country is confronting and say, here's your role in resolving it, and yours, and we assign people that responsibility so that it's not just me floating out there. It is about pulling in allies wherever they can be found. And it's about building coalitions so that everyone understands that we all have a stake in this. When you see something happening to one community, you think you're not a member of that community. The minute you decide that it's not your problem, that's how it just continues to grow and not be resolved. And it's as our civil rights leaders would say, none of us are free until all of us are free. That is pretty much the concept, and those are the words that we all need to live by, is to link arms and embrace these issues and think about how all of us are meant to be engaged in this experiment together, and not me on this side looking at you on your side and not understanding how we can actually find each other on any of these sides.
It resonates with me because I just signed a petition in support of a young man in Texas who he is himself an immigrant. He's a DACA recipient. And he's been living in this country since he was a child. He runs one of the immigration coalitions in Texas, working with business leaders, spends a lot of time up here on the Hill. And because of the backlog with DACA right now, his status is he can't work. So he's got a pregnant wife. He can't work. He's been contributing to the country for many, many, many years, went to school and all the things. And he sent out a petition to people who are allies and who want to help him. And I signed the letter because I know him. And there are people from all walks of life, all across the political spectrum, who've come together to sign this petition on his behalf, hoping for some sort of a resolution. I think about young people like him. Maddie, I want to get you to jump into this conversation and help us understand a little bit about some of the conversations that you and your peers might be having about this particular issue and others. What are you guys thinking, feeling, saying about how we are dealing with the immigration issue in our country right now?
From my experience, it's very divided. Like I said earlier, it really depends on where you get your news. And I think that's true for pretty much any situation. I think especially in recent events with ICE and everything that this administration has done, it's become very polarized. And I don't really like that word. I feel like it's overused sometimes. I find it hard and I find it difficult to have conversations with people who oppose my opinions, oppose any opinion. It's a very hard climate right now to have these open conversations, especially in a college town when we are bringing people in from all over the world and all over the political spectrum. It's very difficult to broach this subject, and class gets very dicey very quickly. We try to, Jay and David knows, they've taught classes with me before. It gets very hard to navigate politics without stepping on toes, without getting in trouble. And so I would say that I go back to, it's uncertain times. My generation is inheriting what this generation is doing now, and we're gonna have to fix or renew or...
What we've messed up. Just say it, just say it. We can
I was trying to be a little bit more eloquent about it.
We can take it. We're gonna keep talking. We're gonna come into the audience now. Go finish your train of thought.
That was really it.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, we are inheriting what they are messing up right now. I don't think it's all as terrible as it seems. I have much hope for our future generations. My generation especially are pretty great. But yes.
Bravo.
Thank you, Will.
Okay. Time to get you. Who's got a thought, question, concern? Excuse me. I'm going to come right over here. Okay. What's your comment?
So, in regards to immigration, the Pew Research Center said that around 2023 that the United States count of illegal immigrants reached an all-time high of 14 million. If you divide that by the average size of congressional districts, that's about 20 congressional districts that tend to favor blue states. There are some that favor in Texas too. Why is it a matter of granting mass amnesty to these people and bringing them into our elections, or having them influence our elections? Why is that an issue that should just be solved and written away with amnesty?
I'll let whoever wants to take that. I don't think we're talking about mass amnesty, but anybody want to jump in here?
I'm happy to jump in. I don't think on the table is immediate voting rights for mass amnesty. So I think that the political ramifications would be a much longer term story here, and it wouldn't be something that's immediate. But I reiterate my point about the long-term political and coalitional impact of immigrants eventually becoming naturalized, and not just voters, but participants in an industrial or post-industrial economy, I mean, that is going to change the politics. I see that as the way of like getting off this treadmill that we're on in these razor close elections. Once you have a new voting bloc there, as you did in the 1930s, both parties are going to behave differently, and politics are going to change. And I think we've already seen that with working class politics changing the political coalitions, and that will go into hyperdrive. So I don't think it's going to naturally favor one party or the other. I think it's going to change and shock the political system itself as it did in the 1930s, and I very much welcome that development.
Linda, real quick, as you track down the next question. I would say that, historically, we have reached bipartisan agreement on immigration, migration issues. I would love to see that again. Some of us can remember when over on the Hill there were members of both parties who could come together and forge agreements on these key issues. It's a very complex issue, and there's no one simple solution. But if we come together and work for broader interests, build coalitions and allyship, we can move forward in a way that can reflect our broader interests. But right now we're just lobbying missiles at each other across the world.
There actually is bipartisan legislation that's happening right now, and there are a lot of members on both sides of the aisle who have come together to address this issue. And we'll see. Hopefully, there will be some action there. Go ahead,
Okay,
Jim.
I have a question on the side, sir.
Yes.
Here.
I'm a Mizzou alumni. I graduated from law school in '75, and as I look around here, I think I may be the oldest person here.
He's the wisest.
Well, I don't know. I would say this, as to immigration, I disagree with virtually everything this man said. But let me put it another way. One of the things that bothers me and really grates, it's like drawing fingernails across a blackboard, if anyone remembers blackboards. The idea we live in a democracy. We don't. We've never had a democracy. Our founding fathers considered democracy and specifically rejected it for a very good reason, because all democracies have always failed and always for the same reason. When the majority figures out that they can vote themselves money from the treasury, they do. So we don't want a democracy. And
Do you have a question?
Well-
It's my job to ask you that. Okay.
I have a question. Why aren't we being taught the truth about what we have as a republic? Because that's what we need to keep.
Okay, he proved the point, thank you very much, that every issue has two sides. Nobody's always right, nobody's always wrong. So thank you for asking a complicated question. And I'm just curious which one of you is going to answer that question.
I would just say, as like a student today, I have always been taught that we are a representative democracy and that we are a mix. And I go back to the Churchill quote that democracy is the worst except for every other, Like we inherited a lot of things whenever we became a nation, and part of that was creating our own thing. We are a conglomeration of states, and I think that we created our own form of government in the best way that we know how, and it's doing an okay job so far. We're here 250 years later.
I like Ben Franklin's quote better when they said, what kind of a government when someone asked him, what kind of a government do you have? He said, we've got a republic if
we can keep it, yeah. If we
Great quote.
can keep it.
Thank you, sir.
What is your question or comment, sir?
So my name is Tom Warwick, Missouri, December 1975 graduate. I actually worked on immigration. I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security for 11 years. And was one of the architects of the bipartisan efforts in 2023. Yeah. Professor Sexton, one of the things I learned at Mizzou was actually something that inspired us on, you take an issue like monetary policy. Can you give us the background why in the 1890s monetary policy was as divisive as immigration is today? Yeah. And then explain how that got solved by taking monetary policy out of politics. And the country became enormously rich as a result of that. Can you give us that background?
I can. I love that question. The guy in the pink, don't listen, because you may not like my answer. This is one of those head scratchers. I'll be quick here, but you know, in the 1890s, it's one of those things. You look back at these different moments in the past, and you're like, hey, they should have been fighting about these other things. They should have been fighting. That's the decade of imperialism. That's the decade when Reconstruction, the last gasp of African Americans after the Civil War, and the idea of African American equality is properly crushed. Yeah. So we think they should be debating those things, and they are. But the thing that they are really animated about is the gold standard versus bimetallic currency, having silver there too, also maybe having paper money, tariffs, all of these things, and it generated such interest and vitriol. It's one of those things that's curious to us now. But I think you answered the question yourself, and you're like, how did they solve that problem? Well, they solved that problem in part through the election results of 1896, which kept the gold standard. It was a decisive win for the Republican Party until you get into the New Deal era. So that kind of solves it. And then you reform monetary policy by adding new branches of government and new agencies, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which did organize and restructure America's banking and monetary system. So it kind of took it out of some of the elections. It will reappear from time to time, but it created a governmental solution to what had been a really vexing problem for democracy. Now, I don't know if the parallel for what you're getting at is that there's a comparable analog for how the immigration question might be resolved today, but I would guess if you were to do that, you would think that government policy could provide a solution to answering, for example, one of the big questions, and I want to make it clear, like, there needs to be immigrants. There needs to be lots of immigrants into this country. In fact, there needs to be even more probably than there used to be because of our long-term fiscal problems and because of our tax base, which is shrinking. But there needs to be a system and control for how that happens. And I think that's why people were so opposed to the Biden-era immigration policy, because it seemed like control had been lost. So if government can be efficient, can be trusted, and entrusted by the people to turn the lever and the dial up and back. This is how many immigrants we need this year. This is how many we need next year. And do so in a kind of technocratic way. If that solution can work, I'm all for it. Last point, sorry, I'm droning on here. But the problem with your proposal or your solution there is that this is a time in which technocratic government has never had its stock lower in terms of popular opinion. So I think that you'd have to restore that somehow, and perhaps you restore that through action, through showing results. So I'm not opposed to that whatsoever, and good luck to you, sir, if you're spearheading this one for
Jean has a question back there.
We're going to go to the back of the room.
Hello. I had a question. Sorry, let me stand up. I also had a question for Dr. Sexton. You mentioned that 15% number and like it becoming a problem historically. I wanted you to elaborate on that. But for the rest of the panel, why do you think the topic of immigration has been able to shake our country, you know, in historical context? Like, why has it been able to shake our national identity?
And keep in mind, we want USA Today answers, not New York Times. Okay, go.
I'll answer this on just shaping the country and this idea that it relates to inclusion, really, that we've created this open space to welcome people and then to kind of develop this mentality of being enterprising, that that's kind of the culture of America, and that's why we're so proud, and countries admire us, even though the stats are saying something different right now. But that, to me, it really is temporary. This is a moment that we're in. But if you look at just broadly what is American culture, for me it represents that. I think about this idea that you can arrive here, whether it was voluntary or involuntarily, and still make something of yourself. We've had to fight, though, to make sure that that dream can actually become a reality for most people. I think that acknowledging that about ourselves and about our history is the most productive way to continue building new history. There are opinions on the spectrum about that. You know, do we kind of get rid of some of the things that we don't want to think about? But Most would agree you solve issues by first acknowledging that there is one. You take the perfect and imperfect parts of yourself and you keep building on that. Think about how hard it is in this moment, especially for younger generations, to even engage in dialogue about these issues. If I could just digress for a moment, I wanted to talk about social media because I know the world is structured very differently. You know, if we look at how we resolved issues in the 60s, the things that people have to deal with today to even get to the table, it's extraordinary. And we have to acknowledge that as a society, that the ways in which we can communicate now and put opinions out, hide behind things, that's affecting this whole civil dialogues concept.
Yep.
Social media is not a negative thing, but I want us to acknowledge the impact that it's having on our ability to even engage in dialogue, to bring us back to the concept of tonight.
Such an important point. Such
That
an important point.
you have to keep building through that and not losing that connectivity to be able to even debate these issues and decide what kind of country you want this to be.
Thank you, Brenda. What's your question?
Hi, my question is specifically for Brenda, but clearly anyone else can answer. It's about coalition building and also trust, as Dr. Sexton was talking about. We clearly know that, like in the Democratic Party specifically, we have an issue with coalition building. It's how we lost 24. We've had it, I mean, since forever, since like abolition and the suffrage movement. Going forward, if we're going to try to coalition build maybe across the aisle, how do you suppose that we do that, especially considering that a lot of people across the aisle, for me, don't believe in my right to have bodily autonomy, don't believe in other people's rights to vote, to be able to go to the ballot box?
Great
There's
question.
a few ways. So very briefly, it is about us deciding that we're going to acknowledge that you have your views and I have mine. Think about the two families between like the Bushes and the Jacksons, for example. Very few people know that after the '88 campaign, even though Jesse Jackson was technically running against George H.W. Bush, when that election was done, back to my original quote of his words of what happens after you've gone through that journey, they reached out to the family. And they said, even though we don't agree on things, what I do agree with is that you're an American and I'm an American and you have a view and I have a view. And Jean and Linda say this a lot. We want the same thing. Let us respect each other to acknowledge we want to get there in different ways, but we still have this same end goal. And so it starts with that respect. And to be clear, not everyone's going to get there. You know, I see your pure heart and you're ready to engage in dialogue. Not everyone's going to do that. But I still have optimism that the majority of the country wants to do that. It's in how we approach each other. And I feel that responsibility very personally, even how I present myself. How open is my listening ear? That starts with me. So I'm not responsible for how someone else receives me or an opposing view, but I am responsible for how much I open up that opportunity for them to at least hear me. And it's going to take each of us building that.
Brenda, you're creeping into New York Times territory. We have a lot more questions out here.
We have a ton of
Do you wanna
questions
add
out
to
here.
that?
Yeah, just
A
two
PS?
sentences. In diplomacy, we talk a lot about mutual interests. And I think to build coalitions, you have to find a mutual interest that transcends one view.
Okay, all right, question.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you all again for being here today and having this conversation. One of the things, I'm a journalist, and so I kind of see this divide every single day. One of the things that I think truly does divide us is a continued lack of critical thinking and logic when it comes to decisions that are made even at the highest level. How much do you think critical thinking does play and will continue to play, not only in government, but in the United States as we see the rise of AI and social media continue to have an effect on our culture?
Oh, and who's going to do that?
Yeah, I certainly, yeah.
I would say firsthand as a student, I have definitely encountered a lot of AI use, and I've even read some peer papers who are obviously written by AI. And I've also talked about this a lot at work. So I'm working for the Treasury right now, and we're talking a lot about implementing AI and when is the correct time to use it and when it's not. And I think that critical thinking is so important and impactful and such a core skill that you need to have, and I'm already seeing this AI degrading that, and kids are being taught how to use AI in first, second, third grade whenever we were learning how to write papers and do book reports. And I mean, Jay, you can touch on this too. I'm sure you've seen a little bit of decline in papers since AI use, but you use Blue Books now. So I would say, like, I think it is incredibly important, especially as Gen Z is going into that more next generation of like Congress and writing bills. I would say without that critical thinking aspect, I think we're going to have a decline in some of our legislation.
Can I just jump in here to say also from the Hollywood perspective, because this is a real hot button issue for us in the entertainment industry. It's about critical thinking and also creative thinking. In corporate space, I'm finding that AI is not seen as much of a threat because there are useful ways to incorporate it into daily work. And if it creates efficiencies, you shouldn't be afraid of it as a tool. But on the creative side, it's received very differently in Hollywood. It is seen as a replacement, as it is in so many industries, but there's so much passion around this topic because the question becomes, can this kind of technology replace the human experience? So my very brief non-New York Times answer is no, it cannot. I'm not threatened by AI. I think that we just have to acknowledge its existence and figure out how to live alongside it.
Okay, we've got one right back here.
It's for you. Yes. Here. There. Hi. This is a bit of an open-ended question, but I was wondering if you could change one part of our political system or governmental structure. What would you change? Like, for example, I think that I would change how the Electoral College functions. I'm wondering if you guys have any ideas about that.
Why don't all four of you answer
Great
that?
question.
Pop quiz.
Yeah.
3 sentences. Go.
I think in recent years, we've seen a lot of swings in the elections. And my view is there was a time when the Electoral College made sense. But as a country, you have to acknowledge perhaps that those systems may not apply in today's world. And so if you're looking at this, just acknowledging the majority speaking, voting is about the people speaking. So that would be the argument for why the popular vote should be the way that we conduct elections now, because it may be the most accurate way to capture the American people speaking.
I love you, Brenda, but that was not 3 sentences. Okay, next.
I didn't promise 3 sentences.
Yeah.
Presidential power needs to be reined in. And it's there. We just need to do it.
Okay, next.
They stole both my answers. I thought of another right as Jay said that. I'm going to go to the Electoral College and say the idea that the people can vote for a president and the Electoral College can pick someone else doesn't sit right with me all the time.
Okay, David.
Amen.
All right.
Okay, he gets a prize for brevity.
Okay.
Thanks. This question's for Brenda. I've been really inspired by what you've had to say so far. A lot of times, I'm sure other people feel the same way. It can be really hard to just figure out how to take one step forward in a day and become incredibly overwhelmed by everything. Is there anything that you do personally just to take one step forward and to keep moving forward?
That's such a great question. You focus on gratitude first. And I look at my life and I think about if I ever want to be upset about the ways of the world or this, I think about how fortunate I am that I get to exist in the world in the first place, and that I know that each day that I wake up is an opportunity for me to do something that's going to impact someone else. My advice to my friends is always, when you're having a bad day, if there's something happening that's overwhelming you, politics, personal, you have until 11:59 p.m. that night to stew about it, and then at midnight, you leave that in that day. And I can't tell you how many of my friends follow that advice, that they literally psychologically say, I release all of this. Let's talk about faith. I release this into this day, and I wake up every day with this new opportunity, and I can control that. I can control how I react to my circumstance.
Okay,
I
and
love
who else
that.
Wants
Love
to answer that?
Okay, we've got
Anybody
one right
else?
here.
Hi, Andrew Fisher, class of 15. My question for you all is focused around the fact that campaigns drive so much of our politics today. And each side seems to strongly utilize, and in my opinion, overly utilize, the message that the other side is trying to end democracy. And that phrase really bothers me, especially when we're coming from an election where it was popular in Electoral College victory. And yet we still have people saying it's the death of democracy. And so how do we move past this mentality that each side is going to end our democracy.
Don't all jump at once.
I'll just say that I think the political opening is there. I think the political opening is there. I think that the precedent is the Obama campaign of '08, and I think that the market will respond to that kind of a message. And I would be surprised if we don't see it in 2028.
Yeah, I think we can't demonize our neighbor. I think for me, it comes back to love your neighbor. You know, we might disagree on an issue or two, but I affirm that you're a good person and that you have a good heart for our country and humanity.
I have
If
to
we
say
build
this
on
too.
that.
Yes, my family taught me to respect the office. It always comes back to that. In 2016, when the world seemed like it was exploding, depending on who you talk to, we got a lot of calls to our headquarters in Chicago. We have a civil rights nonprofit. And so there were a lot of people who were dismayed, and I was dismayed. And it's in fact how I ended up at Points of Light. I was sitting at a State Department dinner that John Kerry was hosting. I was sitting next to someone who happened to be connected to Points of Light. I didn't know anything about them at the time. And I was lamenting the state of the world. I said, I know people disagree and some people are very excited. I wish there was some middle ground we could find where we just unite and decide the election occurred. That was the decision. What is your role going to be? And this is how he pointed me. He said, you need to be around people who feel that exact way, that it is about respecting the process and the office. And so what we told our constituents, don't call upset or dismayed. Life isn't over. This is a new narrative. It is back to the office. And that's how our family has always functioned. And we're proud of the relationships we have on both sides, all sides, and it's always the way it's going to be for us.
Okay, I think Linda has two over there.
Yep.
I have two over here.
Okay,
and then
you're
we're
next.
probably going to have to end it.
Yep, go ahead.
I think they kick us out, right?
No, we're good. We've got a few more minutes. Go ahead.
Hey guys, this is a question for Dr. Sexton and whoever else wants to answer. Back in the olden days, the world was a lot less multinational. You know, you had to travel across the ocean. You couldn't send an email or a text to your friend across the world and have it get there in a second. It feels like a lot of conversations about immigration and just kind of the broader political system are inherently multinational now. Do you think that that has impacted what future iterations of political change look like? Will revolution be more of a global phenomena, or will we see it still be more of a national rippling phenomena?
Yes, yes, and yes is the quick answer to your really, really good question. It makes solving the problems much more difficult because there's not just an internal national problem. You have to think about partner countries. That's why we need good diplomats like David out there. But just look how the divisions that you see in this country are starting to reappear and appear in other countries. And I think that speaks to the actual integration of the last 30 or 40 years. So we're going to see more comparable political movements and contexts in other countries at the same time we're seeing them here. And last point, if you're looking for a savior, don't think that it's going to be an American. It could be someone from the outside. Who's the most important figure in starting the American Revolution? It was someone who'd been here for 13 months, an immigrant, Tom Paine. So immigrants will leave their mark in that way as well.
Can I, real quick? From an international context, it really complicates our lives that we now have 35 countries around the world where you can't get a visa to come to the United States. We want to compete with China and Africa, and yet we're not engaging 1 billion people on that continent. That is a challenge for our global presence. And if we want to think of ourselves as we shout at the World Cup games, we're number one, we're the number one superpower, you have to build trust with people around the world.
Thank you, David. What's your question or comment?
My comment is this. There's a foundation that underlies all of these discussions. And the foundation is that the United States is a family made up of lots of different types of people. Now, as my priest would say, families are messy. We don't get along all the time. But that does not necessarily mean that you treat the other one as if they're the enemy, or there's something, Solomon say about them. There's something bad about them. No, that's not the answer. The answer is, how do you go about listening to them and finding out, gee whiz, my attitude may be the problem.
What a concept.
Thank you. You
Thank
just
you.
described civil dialogues. Okay, this gentleman.
So you folks talked a bit about American exceptionalism, and you kind of talked about the form of government. Do you think American exceptionalism often stands in the way of us progressing and looking outside our borders to build a better form of government? And two, do you think the form of government that we have, which is not a parliamentary form of government like Europe has, creates this almost inevitable situation where we have polarization, where people don't feel like there's one party that really represents them, so they end up picking the party that they think is the closest and then regretting it. And so that's why you have so many people who are so disappointed with what system that we have.
Can I just say quickly, there's a new poll just out today. 47% of Americans now call themselves independent. It's the largest number in the history of our country. So almost half of Americans do not consider themselves Democratic or Republican. Okay. Thank you. Did I just answer that question?
American exceptionalism is like a myth of the Cold War. It's not even something that was discussed in the 19th century, so I think the sooner we dispense with it, the better. And it's revealing that when Germany and Japan were reconstructed politically under American occupation, the form of government that was presented there was the parliamentary system that you suggest. But we're stuck with our system, and I think it still can work.
I think for me, part of the humility we need to have about our founding documents is that 250 years ago, they were an extraordinary advance in human history and human freedom. But there have been a lot of other constitutions that have been written in the last few years that people have noted. And some people have learned lessons from us. So again, for me, it's humility and pride at the same time.
Thank you, David. What's your question or comment?
Hi. There seems to be two groups of people, one which is super open to having these complicated discussions, which I would assume is the majority in this room being a forum for that. But there seems to be this other group of people that's the complete opposite, that has unwavering disagreement with whatever somebody has to say. I mean, even as we've seen apparently about what our government functionally is. So what does coalition building actually look like in practice, aside from just agreeing that that's something that has to happen? Like, yeah, we need to reach mutual agreements, but like, how do we do that when there's so many people that are unwilling to even speak?
That's a perfect last question, because it now gives us an opportunity to talk about the call to action. What can we all do? Who wants to take
So
that?
it goes back to this question of just self-reliance and responsibility. I think about how overwhelmed I am sometimes thinking about what you've just described. Like, I feel that my heart is there, that I go out of my way to make sure that I'm creating a safe space for people to express, and I want that. And there's millions of people who aren't ever going to agree with me on that. They're going to stay in their lane. So all you can do from a human standpoint is to decide, I choose to structure my life and my interactions this way, and that creates that ripple. So this room is powerful tonight. All of you matter. It matters that you're here, that you have a perspective, that you felt that it was worth your time to carve out tonight space to listen and engage. And so I see the change happening. So I'm less concerned about the state of the world just because of the crowd that's gathered here tonight. And so all movements start with that. It's small. It's literally a concept. I think back again to Dr. King, and when he and my uncle would speak in private about their motivations. I get this all the time. Just like, look at him as a figure. On April 3rd, 1968, he was a marcher. April 5th, he was a martyr. That leap occurred. When he was a marcher, he was an agitator. People were threatened by him. People don't like change. Then he was taken away from us, and all of a sudden the ideas started to make sense and the dream started to grow. But we had to go through this transition moment where he had given thought to what is his role and his voice meant to be. And when he would feel weary, or my uncle would feel weary, they would have to remind themselves, I can't stop trying to make change. What would Harriet Tubman say about me if I gave up? And so as overwhelming as it is to think about how much disagreement there is in the world, how much there's this rigid thought process where people aren't like us in this room, they don't want to sit and have dialogue. Rather than be overwhelmed by it, you acknowledge it and say, okay, but I still have an opportunity to be a part of this movement. Every movement, remind yourself, started that way. That there were people who were committed to creating a different world, and rather than look and say, gosh, this is going to be so overwhelming, I said, okay, you know what? Boom, it starts today. And we ended up in a different place because enough people linked arms and decided, this is the world I want to see. And so literally, that is how it's going to go this time. And every time in history, it's going to start with that ripple of few people here, and it grows, and then you find yourself in a new society. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
So we've got a, David, you go.
Yeah, two things. I think to build coalitions, you need a principle and you need a tactic. And the principle is, I respect your human dignity. You're my neighbor and I love you as my neighbor, for me as a person of faith. But respecting a person's dignity is the principle, and then finding common ground is the tactic. We can disagree, but we can find some common ground in an immigration compromise. We can find common ground on monetary policy. We can find common ground on different things and come together.
Jay.
I would say join a civic organization or institution that's not political.
Love that. Okay, Maddie, as our youngin', as the next generation, you get the last word.
I'm going to go short and sweet and say you have to look inward first. You have to be open to listening and open to challenging opinions. It's really hard whenever someone says something that directly opposes your beliefs, but you have to know that the other person you're talking to also believes so firmly that you're going to have to find some middle ground. There is no change without giving up some of yourself to the other person.
Wow. As we wrap up, we could stay here another, I mean, where's Lauren, who's in charge of us? Are they going to come marching in here like at 8 o'clock with guns and make us No, leave? they're not going to do that. Okay. They're not going to do that. To answer the question of how you all can get involved, and Brenda's going to be very proud of me, there's another former Points of Light board member here. Tony Irving, where are you? So excited to see you. Are you still here, Tony?
She went to dinner at 7:30.
She left? Okay. Well, to hell with her. Okay. But you know what? And this is off Jay's answer. Volunteer. You know what? Volunteer. And, work at a food bank. Teach someone how to read. Go find out, and if you don't know what your cause is or how you can volunteer, go to the Points of Light website, and you can put in your zip code, and they will tell you all the places within your neighborhood where you can volunteer. And when you volunteer, no one gives a rat's ass what your politics are. You won't care the people you're helping. They won't talk politics. They'll just know that you're there helping. And they're going to be very grateful for that. So get off the couch, put down your phones. Yes, I'm talking to all the people on their phones right now. Put down your phones and volunteer. So that's my closing remark. The only thing that I would add to that is that we just have to be willing to listen to each other. We really do. I had a conversation with someone a couple months ago. We started talking, and it became clear to me that we were on opposite sides of an issue. And then I engaged with him, and I asked, out of curiosity, help me understand. And at the end of it, he said, you're the first person to ever have this conversation with me, to even be willing to have the conversation. We were talking about COVID. And he said, thank you for just having the conversation. And so what we try to do here at Civil Dialogues is to create a space that feels safe enough so that whatever your point of view, and we all have a point of view, and we all bring our stories to that point of view, we try to create a safe space where you can express that and hopefully learn something. Listening with an open mind and curiosity is just so critical. Thank you. How about a big round of applause for our panelists? You guys are rock stars, total rock stars, all of you. Please do fill out the post-event survey. The only way we get better is by getting your feedback. We're going to continue doing this. We're going to take a little bit of time off in the summer. We're going to be at Points of Light next week, taking time off in the summer. Then we're going to the West Coast, and who knows where else. So if you've got an idea of how you'd like to engage with us, please do so. Our website is civildialogues.us, and
Thank you all for coming. Give yourselves a round of applause and go out and talk to people. Thank you.